is potentially liable as a sort of extortion. In other words, what's really happening is the threat of ugly, embarrassing litigation, which takes place incidentally with average Joe.
It's really a frustrating position to be in.
Hello, welcome to another video cast. My name's Joe Cordell. This is Cash Counsel. Those of you who are new to the show, this is a show that's dedicated to talking about how guys can think about managing their assets more effectively, particularly from the perspective of asset protection. Many of the people who view this show are people who anticipate divorce, who are going through divorce, or who recently have emerged from a divorce, but not exclusively. So what we hope to do with this series of videos is to talk about things that are helpful to our clients and to other guys related to asset protection. Now, asset protection is a broad term, and depending on who you ask, you'll get a variety of definitions. Some people say, well, gee, we're always protecting our assets inherently. Even the idea of investment is a sort of asset protection. And to some extent that's true, and then others, lawyers in particular, define it much more narrowly. It pertains to taking legal steps to limit the access that creditors might have to your assets or other claimants, which could be an ex-spouse, for example. So our definition here varies. It sometimes the parameters close in a little bit and we focus on those very legal issues, and on other occasions we speak more broadly. And today what I'd like to do is suggest that this is a time of year when you want to think about a sort of inventory. Here we are nearing the end of the year, 2008. I hope it was good for you. I know it was difficult for a lot of our clients, people generally. The economy has been a roller coaster the last 6 to 8 months particularly. We don't know what to expect in 2009. Anything that I tell you is going to be speculation. Anything that anybody tells you, quite frankly, is going to be speculation. So we have to have a sort of defensive strategy to some extent. I will say, however, that I think there's wonderful opportunity in this environment. I think that those who have the ability to think aggressively, to think creatively, to think forward in terms of backward, I think that that's going to position you to take advantage of deals. Real estate right now is wonderful. Florida real estate, I would be surprised if it'll ever get much lower than this. I think that we'll look back on this several years out and see the many opportunities that existed in terms of the listings on the New York Stock Exchange, the American Stock Exchange, real estate in a variety of markets, not just in the Florida market. I think that we'll look back and we'll see that this was a time of great opportunity. But the problem about taking advantage of opportunity is you have to have some cash typically to do that. Now, there are always ways to get around that, but it's much more difficult, and the opportunities are much more limited in number. So I do want you, though, to have a perspective that at all times you want to grow and you want to succeed. You don't want to simply retreat into a bomb shelter and take a defensive strategy like that. It's very expensive. Having said all that, let's talk about what you can do to attend to those things that might be a threat to you, either now or in the future. What is it that while you're building your fortune, while you're succeeding financially, that you can be taken care of to protect you from the backside, so to speak? And we might think of this as a sort of laundry list of items for you to consider. Some of these things are absolutely essential. Some of them are discretionary. Some might not be applicable to you at all. But I want to go down this list and just speak in very general terms and call your attention to these items. There's no better time than the end of the year to start thinking about these things. Now, sometimes, of course, it's better to have considered them mid-year with anticipation to taking advantage of them before the end of the year. But nonetheless, let's talk about them, and we'll see to what extent you're adequately protected from an asset protection standpoint. Where do we start? Why don't we start with a general discussion of sort of risk management. Risk management, as the term implies, means considering how are you going to deal with these known threats that exist out there. And we know that one of the least imaginative but very effective means of dealing with risk management is insurance. Insurance may be, in fact, the best way for many of you to undertake asset protection, quote unquote. Now, there are alternatives, though. Whenever you think of insurance, you think of a commercial policy that you buy and you pay a premium, and that premium reflects the level of risk, and you're in a pool of people with similar risks. But there are different ways to approach that. Risk management in terms of self-insurance is commonly done today. It's increasingly common in the market. where you decide that you're going to set aside funds for that purpose. Some people simply say que sera, sera, and go on down the road without any insurance. That is a form of self-insurance, though really it's just a reckless decision. You see that occasionally among certain professionals. In the medical profession, depending on the area in which certain doctors practice, area geographically as well as the practice area, it may be prohibitive to buy malpractice insurance. So as a result, they do go down the road, kind of whistling through the graveyard, thinking that perhaps they'll dodge the bullet and this will never happen to them. That's not a good way to build your future or provide security for your family. But self-insurance can be a very intelligently arrived at decision, and I know many people do it in part, and then they supplement that with insurance. For example, if you have a very high deductible, I think that makes sense. We commonly do that for a number of risks that Cordell Cordell and our businesses face. We think in terms of high premiums, or rather, we think in terms of high deductibles. And those deductibles may be $20,000, $30,000 or higher, depending on the type of company you're dealing with, the type of risk you're discussing. But by going ahead and undertaking that risk, you pay a much lower premium, and you may have very easily the ability to pay that kind of money. For some people, the threshold's higher. Their attitude is, look, if it's $100,000 or less, I can pay that if I had to. Not that it would be painless, not that it wouldn't be a disruption, but I could pay it. And as a result, I'm willing to only buy insurance when there's claims that exist above $100,000. That's not a bad decision. It can dramatically lower your premiums. And often we are talking about very unlikely risks. And I'm not a proponent of continually living life looking above you, waiting for the sky to fall. I mean, you have to consider probabilities, and some risks are very, very remote, though if they do happen, they're catastrophic. And for those sorts of risks, you want insurance. Your premiums tend to be lower, and the probability of your ever having to actually confront that sort of threat or that claim is very low. So self-insurance, commercial insurance, and this has to be mentioned, risk minimization. That means simply controlling those risk factors that are around you. I mean, what is it that as you sit in your chair that you recognize as a threat to you? Depending on the type of business you're in, depending upon what you do in terms of your activities. Surely, for example, you don't drink and drive. That's an easy one. Surely you in the workplace, you take precautions to minimize risks for your employees. Surely around your home, similarly, you consider anything that is overtly a very risky situation or very risky. For example, around your home, similarly, you would think about minimizing risk. So these are things that any reasonable person can do as they go throughout their life. They can continually look around them and think about what is it that constitutes a threat to me potentially. And some of these things you can fix. You can eliminate risk. If you eliminate the risk, then obviously you don't have to think about insurance or self-insurance because you've dealt with it. And think about that not just in the workplace. Think of it in your personal life. But that's not to be ignored. It may be the simplest solution to the most grave threats around you. What else might you do? Well, as we go down this sort of laundry list, we can't fail to mention entities. Entities are huge. And some of you I know say, of course there's an entity in place. I wouldn't dream of conducting a business without a corporate form. But others of you are saying, an entity, what's that? Or why do I need an entity? So I'm not going to go in great detail because I don't want to insult your intelligence. I think most of you know that if you operate without any sort of corporate form or an entity other than a corporation that provides protection from personal liability, if you don't have that, then you continually are at risk to massive suits, depending again on your business. Some businesses are inherently more risky than others, but it can threaten your home and other personal property that you have. And it's so inexpensive to form an entity. This is something that you can do. You've heard the ads, LegalZoom and these various ads where you send off, again, I don't know the details, $50, $100, whatever it is, and you get this entity, this form that I assume is appropriately done. And don't take that as an endorsement by any means. What I would suggest to you is that you go to a lawyer that you know and trust. They're not going to charge you much money to form an entity, and at least you can ask some questions and you can assure that it's in place and it's appropriate to your circumstances and your jurisdiction. And depending on your jurisdiction, the entity that you choose could vary. An LLC is better for some places. That's a limited liability company. An LLP, a limited liability partnership, in some jurisdictions is very functional. In some businesses, particularly professional service businesses, it's a very popular form.